This is Linda West with the Nightly News. QE3 begins today, so that means more bank giveaways while the Americans suffer. 2008, when these bailouts started, and we sent trillions of dollars to the banks, hoping that somehow it would trickle down and help Americans, that really didn't seem to work. So then they brought in QE1 and QE2. Now we're seeing QE3, but unlike the other two, QE3 is going to be endless. From an article by Mike Snyder, he writes, the Fed is going to buy $40 billion worth of mortgage-backed securities per month until they have decided that the economy is in good enough shape to stop. In other words, we're going to print a bunch of money and buy stuff for as long as we feel it's necessary. So here we go. This is an all-out attack against the U.S. dollar. Obviously, they're going to continue to print even more money, according to the Fed, such as with Operation Twist and its policy of reinvesting principal payments from agency debt and mortgage-backed securities back into mortgages. That comes to $85 billion a month. Okay, let's let that sink in a second. That's $85 billion a month that the Fed is going to start printing up with no end date. So, what exactly do we think that this is going to do to the American dollar? And how do we think that this is possibly going to help when QE1 and QE2 didn't help? And let's put another thing out there. It's not like this money is coming home. This money is going overseas, probably mostly to China. It's not going to come home for research, infrastructure, to help education or pensions. None of this is coming home. The only thing coming home to us is the big bag of debt, not only to us, but to our children. So what do we do about this? What could we possibly do? Well, one thing we could possibly look at is Iceland. Now, you probably haven't heard a whole lot about Iceland because there seems to be a big blackout in our mass media outlets on what is actually going on in Iceland. So let me tell you what actually happened in Iceland. When the recession hit in Iceland, they were sitting in a much worse situation than we are now. But they handled it a little differently. In fact, they completely revolted. They rebelled, they went nuts. They went down to the parliament and they started throwing rocks. In fact, what happened next, according to a Ron Paul article, was extraordinary. The belief that citizens had to pay for the mistakes of a financial monopoly, that an entire nation must be taxed to pay off private debts, was shattered, transforming the relationship between citizens and their political institutions and eventually driving Iceland's leaders to the side of their constituents. The head of state, Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, refused to ratify the law that would have made Iceland citizens responsible for its bankers' debt and accepted calls for a referendum. Obviously, they're not drinking the fluoride over in Iceland, because then in March 2010, they passed a referendum with a 93% vote against repayment of the debt. The people just said no. Iceland chose the route of protecting its populace, the taxpayer, from absorbing more debt so that the global banking oligarchy could be made whole. With the support of a furious citizenry, the government launched civil and penal investigations into those responsible for the financial crisis. They went out with arrest warrants for the ex-president. They actually went and indicted the prime minister and arrested the top 3 CEOs of the top banks. That's how Iceland handled it. So, this is what else they did. They forgave the debt of a quarter of their citizens. 25% of their citizens, they just said, no, you don't have to pay it back. And for those people that were underwater in their mortgages, over 110%, they forgave those too. Now, they didn't take that very well, the bankers that control everything. They threatened them, they intimidated them, they said, when you go down, we're not going to give you any loans. But guess what? They didn't go down. In fact, they flourished. On top of it, they wrote a new constitution. This is what they did. The people of Iceland elected 25 citizens from among 522 adults not belonging to any political party, but recommended by at least 30 other citizens. This document was not the work of a handful of politicians, but was actually written on the internet. The constituents' meetings were streamed online, and the citizens could send their comments and suggestions witnessing the document as it took shape. The Constitution that eventually emerged from this participatory democratic process will be submitted to Parliament for approval after the next elections. So they rewrote the Constitution. They actually threw the politicians out. They got people, normal people, that the other people at all decided that these were the best people, and then they put it online. I mean, talk about democratic. Okay, so how did that turn out? Everyone said it was going to go down. It was this big experiment because we really haven't heard, right? Well, I'll tell you how it turned out. They're flourishing. Their GDP has rebounded. In fact, they're doing better than the EU and most of the developing nations right now. And according to the Fitch rating on Bloomberg, the unorthodox crisis policy response in Iceland has succeeded. So the takeaway is QE1 didn't work, QE2 didn't work, and QE3 is certainly not going to work. Hyperinflating our dollar is not going to work. What will work? What did work is Iceland's program. So they sent policemen in to arrest the bankers, and they succeeded. They're doing great. So I say, let's do what Iceland did. This is Linda West reporting for Nightly News.
Visit infowars.com and prisonplanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.